Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover how to train the back for maximum muscle growth. First and foremost, let's have a look at the anatomy of the back. The back consists of many different muscles that perform many different movements. However, there are only a few primary muscles that are superficial and are actually visible on a trainee's physique. The primary muscles are the latissimus dorsi, or lats for short, the upper, mid, and lower trapezius, or traps for short, the rear delts, and then some other smaller muscles like the rhomboids, infraspinatus, teres major, and teres minor. Another muscle group that should also be noted is the spinal erectors. Although they are located beneath some of the superficial muscles, they are a large muscle group that can be visibly developed through training. The lats originate from the lower spine and the fascia around the lower back. The insertion point is on the humerus bone near the shoulder joint. We can see that the muscle fibers of the lats run in a more horizontal direction around the spine and in a more vertical direction around the shoulder. The direction that these fibers will pull will also change depending on the position of the arm. The traps are an interesting muscle because there are three semi-distinct portions to it: the upper, middle, and lower traps. The traps originate from the bottom of the skull and from the upper and middle parts of the spine. The insertion point is on the scapula and the outer part of the clavicle. Because of the shape and attachment points of the traps, we can see here that the muscle fibers run in different directions. The upper fibers mainly run horizontally and some of them run vertically. The middle fibers run almost completely horizontal and the lower fibers run more vertical. The rear delts originate on the scapula like the traps, but they insert on the humerus bone around the shoulder joint. As we can see here, the fibers all run in essentially the same direction, making their actions fairly straightforward. The spinal erectors essentially run along either side of the spine, attaching on the spinal bones and the ribs. The fibers of these muscles all run vertical, making their line of pull all in one direction. Let's now explore what movements the muscles of the back produce. Because there are multiple muscles involved and many different fibers running in different directions, the muscles of the back produce many different movements. There are three main regions that the back muscles act on. These are the shoulder joint, the scapula, and the spine. In terms of the shoulder joint, the back muscles perform three actions. First is shoulder extension. This is where the arm is brought down in front of the body. Second is shoulder adduction, which is where the arm is brought down towards the side of the body. And third is horizontal extension. This is where the arm is moved backwards in a lateral movement. In terms of the scapula, the back muscles perform another three actions. First is depression, which is when the shoulder blade is moved downward. The second is retraction, which is when the shoulder blades are pinched back together. And the last is elevation, which is when the shoulder blades are shrugged upward towards the neck. And the back muscles also act on the spine. They actually act to extend the spine, which means arching the back from a flexed position. So clearly the back muscles produce many different movements on different joints. However, different muscles are more or less emphasized with each of these movements. The lats are going to be emphasized through shoulder extension and adduction. The rear delts will be emphasized through horizontal shoulder extension. The middle and lower traps will be emphasized through scapular retraction and depression. And the upper traps will be emphasized through a combination of scapular retraction and elevation. And the spinal erectors will be emphasized through spinal extension. To train all the muscles of the back, there are two primary exercise categories that can be implemented and two secondary exercises that may have slight additional benefits. The first primary exercise category is horizontal rows. Rows will involve scapular retraction, a combination of shoulder extension and horizontal extension, and some degree of spine extension. This means that rows will primarily emphasize the mid and upper traps, rear delts, and spinal erectors. The lats will also be trained with rows, but they probably won't be emphasized because they aren't taken through a very large range of motion. Some examples of horizontal rowing exercises are seated cable rows, T-bar rows, and barbell rows. The second primary exercise category to train the back is vertical pulls. Vertical pulls primarily involve a combination of shoulder extension and adduction. Vertical pulls take the lats through a larger range of motion than rows, which means the lats will be emphasized, and the rear delts will also be trained. Some examples of vertical pulling exercises include pull-up variations, lat pull-down variations, and pullovers. These two primary exercises will train the entire back, but there are two secondary exercises that may potentially be additionally beneficial for back development. First is a unilateral row or a unilateral vertical pull. This may have additional benefits for the lats, as the unilateral variations allow the lats to be contracted more than any bilateral exercise will allow. Unilateral exercises provide the ability for the body to flex and rotate to the side, allowing the shoulder to adduct and extend more than a bilateral exercise. Some examples of unilateral back exercises include single arm dumbbell rows, single arm pull downs, and single arm cable rows. The other secondary exercise for back development is shrugs. Because some of the fibers of the upper traps run more vertically, some scapular elevation may help develop them further. However, it should be noted that the majority of the fibers of the upper traps actually run horizontally, meaning that they will be trained well with rows alone. Also, these upper fibers are often trained during other exercises like upright rows or overhead press. So if these are already included in the training program, shrugs may not be necessary. Some examples of shrugs include dumbbell shrugs, barbell shrugs, and cable shrugs. So back training should primarily consist of horizontal rows and vertical pulls, and there may potentially be a case for performing some additional unilateral exercises and shrugs. And lastly, let's explore some unique technique considerations that can help to maximize growth of the back muscles. The first consideration is to ensure the scapula is actively engaged during horizontal rowing variations. This is because the entire trapezius muscles attach on the scapula rather than the humerus. Therefore, if we perform rows by simply pulling with the arms without active movement of the scapula, we won't really be hitting the traps very well. To ensure the traps are targeted, trainees should actively retract the scapula with each rep on the concentric portion and allow the scapula to protract on the eccentric portion. In other words, the shoulder blades should be pinched together at the end of the row, and the trainee should let the weight pull the shoulder blades forward for the beginning of the row. Another important consideration when training the back muscles is understanding the strength curve of the movements which train the back. All horizontal and vertical pulling movements have a descending strength curve. This means that the exercise is easier at the start of the lift and harder at the end. So any vertical or horizontal rows are harder as you bring the load closer to the body and easier when the arms are further away from the body. This has a few implications for back training. First is the load used. Trainees should use a load that they can control through the entire range. This usually means using a lighter load than you would expect because the exercise may feel easy at the beginning of the lift but much harder at full contraction. For example, a trainee may be able to move a certain load using the seated cable row, but they aren't able to properly extend their spine and retract the scapula at the end range. In this case, they may be better off reducing the load and ensuring the movement is on point, so the tension is actually placed on the traps. The second implication is to possibly find exercises that have an ascending strength curve. In other words, exercises which get easier towards the end range and harder at the start. This would match up well with back exercises because they have the opposite strength curve. These exercises can allow more tension to be placed on the back muscles throughout the entire range of motion. Some examples of exercises with ascending strength curves are T-bar rows, landmine rows, and some other specially made machines. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.